Talk to me about inflation, because as you know, the BOE today pretty much kept its inflation forecast unchanged. At what point, because more policymakers we discovered today are a bit worried about accelerating inflation, at what point does the BOE really have to start worrying that inflation is a little bit too far higher than its 2% mandate?
Well, obviously, we're still talking about the numbers being below 2, expected to go to 2 later. It certainly looks that inflation expectations are pretty sort of stable. Obviously, they're going to look and think, how much higher is this thing going to go? But the reality is that, and you just gave the Mark Carney kind of comment on it, there are downside risks still. So my suspicion is there will probably be 1 or 2 people on the committee, the obvious people, who worry about inflation risks. But I just want to put in your mind that in August 2008, that was exactly the worry. People were worried about the fact that inflation had got to 5%. But obviously, you had to look through that. That was the right thing to do. So at this moment, they're looking through it. They're worried about whether inflation expectations become, if you like, de-anchored. But I think the reality right now is they're on hold because they've been emphasizing the downside risks to Brexit that Carney talked about. And the bets are kind of off. No one really knows what's coming.
Yeah, which is why I'm going to ask you a question about what's coming, Danny. You've just said no one knows what's coming. What about the unemployment rate? You know, you're a Labour guy, you're a labour markets economist. It said today that the unemployment rate can fall to 4.5% now versus 5% without generating inflation. We already had a guest on that's saying, ooh, he wasn't so sure. He's worried that we might see a pickup in wages before then. What do you think?
Well, I heard that in 2006, 7, 8, 9, and every year since then. The reality is I've been arguing continuously since then that there's much more slack in the labour market, driven by underemployment, potential flows from Eastern Europe. And the reality is that the bank has had it wrong continuously because it's over forecast how much wage growth there would be. If you're close to full employment, you'd expect wages to pick up. So sensibly, and I've argued it on your show lots of times, sensibly today, they've lowered the, if you like, the natural rate of unemployment to 4.5. I think that's still too high. And they've kicked back by half a point what their projections to wage growth are. So they're talking in the 3s, but wage settlements and everything else look to be in the 2s. So it's a sensible step. I think your previous commentator's completely wrong, as those commentators have been for the last 10 years. There's no evidence of wage growth picking up. The economy's a long way from full employment. And the worry is firms are still holding back on investment and hiring. So I think that that was a sensible thing to do. And probably the natural rate of unemployment is below 4.
What about the US then, Danny? Is it a similar situation? We saw today that productivity for 2016, although it was good, or at least better in the fourth quarter at 1%, was only 0.2% for the entire year, growth-wise.
Well, I think it's very interesting. This is the first thing I've been hearing that Donald Trump's been saying that I really agree with. He's talked about actually unemployment being measured wrongly. I mean, technically it's measured correctly, but he's absolutely right in saying that the labour market has much more slack in it than the Fed and other commentators are thinking about. I mean, people keep saying you're at full employment. Well, millions of people have voted for Trump saying there are no decent jobs out there, nothing much is changing. We had the ECI this week, which the Fed always focused on, at 2.2%. So in the US, we have a huge group of people who left the labour force. Employment rates are well below it. So I think in the US, the scale of the labour market slack is much greater than in the UK. It's very easy to get to numbers of 5, 6, 7, 8 million. So on this one, I think Trump is right. I think the Fed's completely wrong. The US economy is miles away from full employment, and there's no wage growth there either. This is the dog that hasn't barked and isn't going to bark.